My name is Joshua. I'm 32 years old, and I just spent 10 hours driving back to Millbrook, Pennsylvania, a town I hadn't seen in 7 years. I left with a plan and a woman I thought I'd marry. The only thing that came back with me was a duffel bag, a broken muffler, and a heart I didn't think could take another knock. I figured I'd fix my grandmother's porch and let the quiet do what it does. Then the woman next door showed up with a warning I didn't understand. "Don't lock your door tonight," she said. The truck's muffler rattled louder than it should have as I turned onto Oak Street. It was almost 10 at night, and the only light still on belonged to the bar 2 blocks down and a street lamp that flickered like it was thinking about quitting. My grandmother's house sat at the end of the row, a 2-story wooden place with a porch that sagged on the left side. I hadn't seen it in 7 years. The paint was peeling worse than I remembered, and the wind chime by the door still made a sound like broken glass in the cold. I killed the engine and sat there for a minute. The silence hit me harder than I expected. In Philadelphia, there was always noise. Out here, the silence was its own kind of sound. It filled the truck cab and pressed against my ears until I had to open the door just to let some air move. The key turned in the lock like it remembered me. The house smelled like old wood and lavender sachets that had given up their fight against time years ago. My grandmother's lace curtains still hung in the front window, gray now instead of white, and they moved a little when I opened the door, like the house was exhaling. I walked through the rooms with my boots on because the floorboards creaked either way. The kitchen table had 4 chairs tucked under it, exactly where they'd been when she was alive. A porch swing hung from chains on the back deck, squeaking in the wind. I didn't sit in it. I didn't touch anything I didn't have to. I unpacked little. 3 work shirts went on the dresser, a pair of jeans with a torn knee, and a photograph of Sarah and me at a Phillies game that went into a drawer without my looking at it. My work boots went by the door. The duffel bag stayed half-packed on the bed because finishing felt too permanent, like admitting this was home now. Standing at the kitchen sink, I watched the dark outside. The house next door had a light on upstairs, soft and yellow, the kind that made the window look warm against the black. Whoever lived there was none of my concern. I went to bed early. The evening stretched out empty, and I had no use for it. The mattress was my grandmother's, firm and unforgiving. Lying there, I listened to the house settle around me, wood expanding and contracting like it was breathing. Somewhere in the walls, a mouse scratched. Sarah crossed my mind for the first time since the Pennsylvania border. I let myself hold the thought for 3 seconds, then counted ceiling cracks until sleep came. Dreams stayed away that night. That was the first mercy Millbrook gave me. Morning came gray and slow. Cold woke me because the furnace was older than I was, and it groaned instead of heating. Work boots and the jeans with the torn knee went on, and then the front porch called with a cup of coffee from a pot found in the cabinet. The step on the left side had rotted through where the rain pooled. Putting my foot on it to test the weight, the wood gave a sound like a sigh before it crumbled. I almost fell. Catching the railing, I stood there with splinters in my palm, looking at the broken step and the whole weight of what I'd come home to. I was still picking splinters out of my palm when I heard the gate latch click. She came up the walkway with a casserole dish wrapped in a blue towel. Maybe 26, 27, with brown hair pulled back like she did it without a mirror, and a coat too thin for October. She moved like she knew every root and crack in the path. Her boots were scuffed at the toes, and her jeans had paint on the knee, the kind that comes from fixing things rather than making art. "You're the grandson," she said. It wasn't a question. "I am." "I'm Clara. I live next door. I've been watching this house since your grandmother passed, making sure the pipes didn't freeze, bringing the mail inside, that kind of thing." I nodded because I didn't know what to say to that. A stranger had been taking care of my grandmother's house while I was in Philadelphia pretending I didn't have roots? Clara was closer now, and I could see she had a small scar above her left eyebrow, thin and white, the kind you get from a childhood fall. She held out the casserole dish, and I took it. It was still warm through the towel. Chicken and rice, maybe. Something that smelled like Sunday afternoons I barely remembered. "You drove in last night," she said. "I saw the truck. Pennsylvania plates now, but I remember when it had Oregon stickers." "That was my uncle's. I bought it off him when the city job went." She didn't ask what city job. She didn't ask why I was back, or where the woman was who used to visit at Christmas. She just looked at the broken step and then at my face, and her eyes did something I wasn't ready for. They saw me. Not the new neighbor, not the grandson of the woman who used to lend her sugar. The man standing on a broken porch with a duffel bag half unpacked and a heart that didn't know where to put itself. "You fixing this place up?" she asked. "I'm trying to." "Good. It needs someone to care about it again." She handed me a business card. It said, "Clara Vance, Millbrook Public Library," underneath a small drawing of a stack of books. She saw me looking at it and smiled. "I run the library 3 days a week. The other 4, I fix things. Fences, leaky faucets, people who forget to eat." "I don't need fixing," I said. It came out harder than I meant it. "I didn't say you did," she said. "I said the house did. And the step. And probably that furnace, if it's the one I'm remembering." She turned to go, then stopped at the gate. The morning sun caught her hair, and for a second she looked like something out of a dream I didn't think I was allowed to have anymore. She looked over her shoulder at me. "Don't lock your door tonight." I almost laughed. There's nobody in this town who'd rob an empty house. "That's not why I'm saying it." She smiled, but it wasn't the kind that asked for a smile back. It was the kind that knew something I didn't. "Just don't lock it. I'll check on you." She walked back to her house before I could ask what she meant. I stood on the porch with a warm casserole dish and a warning I didn't understand ringing in my ears. The wind chime made its broken glass sound. I looked at her back door and wondered what kind of woman told a stranger not to lock his door. I wondered why I wanted to believe her. I stood at the front door that night with my hand on the lock for longer than I want to admit. My pride told me to turn the deadbolt. It had a lot to say about not needing some woman with paint on her jeans to look after me. But my body was tired in a way that had nothing to do with the drive. Curiosity was stronger than pride, and something else I didn't have a name for yet. The lock stayed alone. I walked to the bedroom and lay down in my grandmother's firm bed and stared at the ceiling. I slept badly. Every creak of the old house sounded like footsteps. A branch scraped against the side of the house, and I sat up, heart hammering, sure someone was climbing through a window. At 11, I was still awake. Then I heard the front door open, quietly, like someone who didn't want to wake the house. I reached for the baseball bat behind the bedroom door and waited. Footsteps in the hallway were soft. They sounded familiar somehow. I tightened my grip on the bat. "Joshua?" Clara's voice came from the kitchen. "It's just me."
"Put the bat down before you hurt yourself." I walked out in my undershirt and jeans, feeling ridiculous. She stood by the kitchen table in a flannel shirt and boots, holding a thermos in one hand and a toolbox in the other. The moonlight through the window caught her face, and she looked younger than she had in the daylight. Or maybe just less careful. "I told you I'd check on you," she said. "You could have knocked. You could have locked the door, but you didn't. So here I am." She set the toolbox on the table and walked to the back window. It was the one above the sink, the latch that had been loose since I was a kid. She opened it, looked at the catch, and shook her head. "This latch is broken. Has been for years, probably.
Anyone could have pushed this window open and climbed right in. Your grandmother used to keep a broomstick in the track. I didn't know that. Most people don't know what's broken in their own house until someone shows them. She pulled a new latch from her pocket and screwed it into the frame. 3 minutes later, the window tested and locked. She turned back to me. I wasn't sure you'd leave it unlocked, she said. Most men lock it just to prove they can take care of themselves. I'm not most men, I said. I didn't know why I said it. No, she said, you're not. She poured soup from the thermos into bowls she found in the cabinet. Chicken noodle, thick with vegetables. We sat at my grandmother's table and ate in silence. The soup was better than anything I'd tasted in months. I couldn't remember the last time I sat at a table with another person and ate. Your brother, I said. You mentioned him earlier. The paint on your jeans. It was his, wasn't it? She looked up from her bowl. Her spoon stayed in her hand, halfway to her mouth. Marcus died 2 years ago in a car accident on Route 22. 24 years old. She set the spoon down. There was a look in the months before, a tiredness around the eyes, like he was carrying something too heavy and couldn't put it down. You have the same look. I didn't say anything. The soup suddenly tasted like salt. I don't mean to pry, she said. I just recognize it. The way you stand, like you're waiting for the floor to give out. I'm not broken, I said. I didn't say you were broken. I said you were carrying something heavy. She stood up and put her bowl in the sink. Lock it tomorrow if you want, but tonight you needed someone to check on you. She picked up her toolbox and walked to the front door. She turned the handle and looked back at me. You ate the whole bowl, she said. That's a start. Then she was gone, and the house was quiet again. But it was a different kind of quiet. Not the empty quiet of a place that had been waiting too long. The quiet of a room where someone had just been sitting. I stood at the door and didn't lock it. I went back to bed and slept until morning without dreaming of Sarah once. The next morning, I fixed the porch step. I found lumber in the shed that my grandfather had stacked 20 years ago, dry and warped, but usable. I cut a new piece to size and nailed it in place. It held when I stepped on it. That small thing, a step that didn't sigh when you trusted it, felt like the first real thing I'd done in months. Clara showed up at noon with 2 coffees in a cardboard carrier and no excuse at all. She just walked through the gate like she belonged there, which by then I suppose she did. She handed me a coffee and sat on the porch swing. It still squeaked, but less now that I'd oiled the chain. You know how to use a hammer, she said. It wasn't a compliment, it was an observation. I used to build houses in Philadelphia, mostly renovations, kitchens, bathrooms, the kind of work that makes a place feel new again. Why'd you stop? I sipped the coffee. It was black and strong, the way I liked it. The job stopped being about the work. It became about contracts and clients and selling things. I got tired of building beautiful rooms for people who didn't know how to live in them. She nodded. The library's the same way. People come in for the internet or the heating, not the books. But every now and then, someone finds the right story at the right time. That makes the other stuff worth it. We worked side by side for 3 days without planning to. I'd be patching drywall in the kitchen, and she'd show up with a putty knife and a level. I'd be sanding the porch rail, and she'd bring sandwiches from the diner downtown, wrapped in wax paper. We didn't talk much. We didn't need to. The rhythm of shared work said more than words. The sound of 2 hammers, the passing of a tape measure, the way she handed me a nail without me asking for it. On the 3rd day, I made a joke about the bathroom wallpaper. Faded pink roses that looked like they'd been screaming for decades. I said something about them being haunted, and she laughed. It was a real laugh, the kind that came out like a surprise even to her. My own voice followed it, rough and unused. The first time I'd heard myself sound like that since before Sarah left. The sound scared me a little. It sounded like hope, and I wasn't sure I knew what to do with hope anymore. I started leaving the door unlocked during the day. At first, it was accidental. I'd walk to the hardware store and forget to turn the key. Then it became something I did on purpose, like testing the water with one toe before you decide to swim. By the 5th day, I didn't lock it at night either. Clara never came through again with soup or a toolbox, but knowing she could if she wanted to changed the way the house felt. It felt less like a place I was hiding in and more like a place where someone might find me. I hadn't told her about Sarah. I hadn't said the name Philadelphia in a way that meant anything. I knew I was building something without blueprints, and I didn't know if the foundation would hold. On the 6th morning, I went to the mailbox at the end of the drive and found a letter with a Philadelphia postmark. My name was written in handwriting I knew better than my own. I didn't open it on the porch. I took it inside, and I sat at the kitchen table, and I looked at the handwriting for a long time before I slid my thumb under the flap. The paper was thick, the kind Sarah always bought, and her pen moved the same way it always had, left-leaning and certain. She was getting married. The man was someone from her office, someone I'd met once at a holiday party and forgotten immediately. There was an apology in the letter, and a hope that I was well, and a thought that I deserved to know before I heard it from someone else. One reading was enough. There was no need for a second to understand what it was saying. The letter got folded along its creases and placed in my shirt pocket, close enough to my heart that I could feel the edge of it every time I breathed. Then I picked up my hammer and went back to work on the fence. My hands needed something to do. The storm came in around 3 in the afternoon. The air turned heavy and electric, the kind of pressure that makes your teeth ache. The sky went the color of old bruises. I was on the porch when the first drops hit, big as fingertips, and I didn't move. Being wet and cold was something I could understand. The letter in my pocket was something I couldn't. Clara found me there an hour later. The rain was coming down in sheets, turning the dirt drive into red mud. She didn't say anything. She just walked up the steps and sat down on the porch swing beside me. The swing moved a little, and then it stopped. We sat there together and watched the storm turn the world into water. "You want to talk about it?" she asked after a while. "No." "Okay." She didn't push. She didn't tell me that talking helps, or that time heals all wounds, or any of the other things people say when they don't know what else to offer. She just sat there. Her shoulder was an inch from mine. I could smell her hair, something like cinnamon and rain. The wind picked up. A branch from the oak tree cracked with a sound like a gunshot and came through the kitchen window. Glass sprayed across the counter and onto the floor. We both jumped up. The rain was blowing sideways now, coming right through the broken window and soaking everything inside. "Boards," Clara said, "in the shed, now!" We ran through the rain. The shed stood 30 feet away, and by the time we got there, the water had soaked us to the skin. Plywood sheets, old and warped, but better than nothing, waited in the corner. Carrying 2 back meant slipping in the mud while the wind tried to take the wood out of our hands. We nailed the plywood over the window from the inside in the dark because the power had gone out. The flashlight on her phone gave us just enough light. Our hands kept touching as we held the boards steady. When it was done, we stood in the kitchen and looked at the mess. The floor was covered in glass and water and leaves. The table was ruined. The letter had fallen somewhere in the chaos, and I didn't look for it. "I'm going to need a towel," Clara said. Her hair was plastered to her face, and she was shivering, but she was smiling. "And probably a drink, though I don't suppose your grandmother kept whiskey." "Under the sink, behind the flour canister." She found it, a half-full bottle of bourbon older than both of us. 2 fingers went into a coffee mug for me and one for herself. We sat on the kitchen floor with our backs against the cabinets because the chairs were wet. The bourbon burned going down and then spread into something warm. "She's getting married," I said. The words came out without me deciding to say them. "The woman I left with. She's marrying someone else." Clara didn't say anything for a long time. Then she said, "My brother's boots are still by my back door. 2 years, and I still can't move them. Every time I try, I pick them up, smell the leather, and put them back down." I looked at her. The flashlight from her phone was dying, turning the kitchen into shadows and amber. She was shivering in her wet shirt, and her eyes were bright with something that wasn't bourbon. "You don't move on because someone tells you to," she said. "You move on because the floorboards creak one morning and you don't think of him first." I looked at her then, not at the neighbor with the casserole dish, not at the woman who fixed window latches. I looked at Clara. The way her wet hair curled at her collar, the way her hands held the mug like it was the only warm thing in the room, the way she looked at me like I was someone worth sitting on a wet floor with in the middle of a storm. I didn't kiss her. The moment wasn't asking for that. The moment was asking me to see her, and for the first time in 7 years, I let myself see someone. The storm passed around midnight. The rain slowed to a drizzle and then to nothing. Standing up together, we looked at each other in the quiet that comes after thunder. She touched my arm, just for a second, her fingers cold and wet and certain. "I'll see you tomorrow," she said. Then she walked out the back door and into the dark, and I didn't lock it behind her. I didn't sleep after she left. I sat in the kitchen and I looked at the boarded-up window, and I felt something I hadn't felt in years. It wasn't happiness. It was possibility, and possibility scared me more than loneliness ever had. Loneliness was a place I knew. It had walls and a ceiling and a lock on the door. Possibility was open sky, and I'd already fallen out of the sky once. The next morning, I drove into town and bought supplies I didn't need. Nails, caulk, sandpaper. Keeping moving was easier than feeling, and I wasn't ready to feel. Clara got avoided for 2 days. Her truck in the library parking lot meant driving past. Her voice in the hardware store meant walking down a different aisle. Protection, I told myself. My heart was a house with too many broken windows, and she was walking through it with a flashlight, seeing everything I didn't want seen. On the second night, I found a note tucked under my windshield wiper. Her handwriting was small and practical, the kind that didn't waste ink. "The door's unlocked if you need it. No casserole this time. Just a door." I read it 3 times. That night, my hand went to the lock, and I didn't turn it. Anger hit from 3 directions at once. Myself for letting hope in. Her for planting it without asking permission. The years of numbness, because she'd walked in with soup and a level and a laugh that made me remember what it felt like to be alive. Being alive hurt. It meant you could lose things. I walked across the yard to her house. The grass was wet from the storm, and it soaked my boots. Her back door was unlocked. I turned the handle, and I walked in without knocking, because she'd told me not to lock my own door, and that meant something about trust I was only starting to understand. She was on the couch, reading a paperback with a cracked spine. She didn't look surprised to see me. She closed the book and set it on the cushion beside her. "I don't know how to do this," I said. "There's no knowing how to be something for someone again, or how to be anything at all." "Then don't be something for me," she said. "Just be here." I sat down on the floor because the couch felt too close and the door felt too far. She handed me a blanket, and I wrapped it around my shoulders. Sarah and Marcus stayed out of the conversation.
The creek behind both our houses came up, and the best way to fix a leaky roof and whether tomatoes grew better in sun or partial shade. Talking continued until 3 in the morning, and somewhere in a conversation about nothing important, I realized I wasn't pretending anymore. Just sitting in a room with another person was enough. She fell asleep on the couch around 3. I covered her with the blanket and watched the light change through the window. The sky turned from black to purple to gray, and I sat there on her floor, feeling the house breathe around us. I didn't leave. I made coffee in Clara's kitchen at 6 in the morning. The filters were in the cabinet above the sink, and the grounds got measured the way my grandmother taught me. 1 scoop for each cup and 1 for the pot. It was the first time I'd made coffee for anyone since before Sarah left. The smell filled the small kitchen, and it felt like an offering, like something you do when you're trying to say thank you without knowing the words. Standing at the stove, I listened to the house settle around me, the same sounds my own house made, but softer somehow, like this place had learned to trust the people inside it. Clara woke up at 7. Her eyes opened, and a smile came before she was fully awake, the way people do when they know they're safe. Sitting up on the couch, she looked at me on her floor with a mug in my hands, but didn't ask why I was still there. Instead, she stretched and said, "You make coffee like you mean it." "I do mean it." She showered and changed while I fixed her porch step. The right side was rotted, a mirror of my own. Lumber from her shed got cut and nailed down. From the doorway, she watched with wet hair and a cup of my coffee. Nothing got said. Neither of us needed words. The step held when she walked across it to hand me a second cup. No thank you came. She just stood there, and the way she looked at the fixed step and then at me was better than any gratitude. It was the look of someone who recognized work done with care. That evening, I stood at my own front door as the sun went down. The sky was the color of tomatoes my grandmother used to grow, deep red, fading to gold at the edges. My hand went to the lock, and I left it alone. Clara would walk through when she was ready. Or maybe she wouldn't. For the first time in my life, the not knowing felt like hope instead of dread. Hope was a door you left open because you trusted what was on the other side. I started building something in the backyard the next week. A small greenhouse, the kind my grandmother had when I was a boy, with a wooden frame and panels of old glass from the shed. It leaned a little to the left, and the door stuck when the humidity rose. But I was building it because I wanted to, not because I had to. Clara brought me lunch in a basket, sandwiches and apples and cold water in mason jars. She sat on an overturned bucket and watched me work. Sometimes she handed me a nail or held a board straight. We didn't define what we were. The not defining was its own kind of truth. Some days she stayed for an hour. Some days she stayed until the light went out and we sat on the back steps eating apples and watching the stars come on. She told me about books people borrowed from her library and never returned. I told her about the good houses I'd built in Philadelphia, the ones where I could tell the family would be happy. We talked around the things that hurt us instead of through them, and somehow that made the hurting smaller. It didn't go away. It just took up less room. One afternoon in late October, the sun turned the wheat field behind her house to gold. I was fitting a panel of glass when she walked up behind me and handed me a jar of water. Her hand touched mine when I took it. The brush of skin against skin felt like the first honest thing I'd felt in years. My eyes found hers, and the wheat turned gold behind us. Neither of us said a word. We didn't need to. The door was open. That was enough. I still don't lock the door. Some things aren't meant to be kept out. The person who matters already walked through, and she keeps coming back.